All right, well, we're in the shop today and we are back to work on my F80 M3 seat time drift car project. We are trying to get this car done, ready to go and on the road for Drift Week, which is less than a week away at this point. And as you can maybe see, we have the entire car blown apart all across the shop here. This thing's just spilled its guts everywhere. We have parts in every corner. And we've more or less got to put the entire car back together. So we've definitely got our work cut out for us, but we are cruising right along. We're past that middle point of taking things apart. At least from here on out, we're pretty much putting things back together. We still got a couple things to take apart, but we're not going to talk about that. We're just going to focus on, we're over the hump and we're going to keep going. So we've got a schedule of what needs to get done each day to make this happen, and it's a lot. So I'm going to quit jibber jabbering and we're going to dive right into our first project. So Sway's gonna start working on finishing up the fire suppression system, and I'm going to see if I can get these axles to finally pop out of these hubs. I've been soaking them in ATF and acetone mixed together for 2 days now. So I'm hoping we can get these apart. If not, I do have all the parts coming to replace all of this if we need to. But in the meantime, I wanna try, give him one more shot, see if I can't get those apart. And then once he's done with that, we can dive into some of the bigger projects, but we just need to tidy up our loose ends that we didn't finish yesterday. So you know the deal. Enough jibber jabber, let's get to work. So as I went to load these things in the press, my fears were confirmed. The CV joint is just too big to fit in the lower portion. It's not gonna happen. So I decided to get creative. I have a bunch of raw material lying around and I have this really thick wall rectangular tubing. So I thought if anything's gonna hold up to this stuff will. We'll be able to put the back piece in, load the assembly in, and then put the front piece in. And while it's a little sketchy and a little crooked, it's gonna work. It's gonna hold things in place. So we give it a shot, and unfortunately, this thing doesn't even budge, man. It doesn't even try. It's literally bending the entire frame of this 20-ton press and not even flinching. So back to the drawing board. All right, well, I'll be honest, I'm a bit disappointed. I was holding out hope that when we hit this thing with the press, it would do it. Now, obviously we had to get creative, but this stuff is really thick wall, 3/16 wall tubing. It's not like this is some thin stuff and it's just bending it, tweaking the whole frame, and the axle's not even considering moving. So I have a puller, which is really more of a pusher, coming today. So we'll try that, last ditch effort. If that doesn't work, we're just gonna have to cut our losses on these axles. We can't afford to waste any more time on them. I already have all the other stuff coming, so we don't need them, assuming all that stuff actually gets here. My goal is just to get them apart so we could use those axles as spares, since the axles that are on the way were what I originally ordered to have as spares. So I just prefer not to have to order 2 more used axles if I don't have to. But like I said, one more chance. We're giving them one more shot. If not, we're cutting our losses. So we finished up the fire suppression system. You can see, can you see that nozzle right there? So that's spraying right at the hot side of the turbo where all the oil lines are. Got nozzle 2 here doing the same thing for the first turbo. And then we've got this nozzle back here, which is spraying the filler neck area where you're most likely to have a major fuel leak. That's, it's pretty covered. This isn't a race car where you would normally have nozzles spraying inside because there's very little separation between you and the rest of the car. We're just trying to, basically an automatic fire extinguisher / a big fire extinguisher if we need to put a fire out if this thing catches on fire on track. We'll also have a handheld too. But just, better safe than sorry. It's an investment protection plan, basically. So that being said, we need to move on. So I'm gonna grab the clutch setup and we're gonna get ready to start getting that tossed in so we can get the transmission back in this thing. All right, so here is our new clutch setup. We're replacing the OEM stock clutch with the Clutchmasters FTX 1000. This is a gnarly clutch kit. We're trying to maintain as much streetability as possible in this car. It's the point of getting a newer BMW is comfort, streetability, but it's also got to hold up to the stress of drifting. So it's a tough line to tow. It's tough to balance. I think this clutch is going to be perfect for us. It should be plenty strong enough, but also still be nice to drive. So we finally have everything we need to put this on the car, and then we can put the transmission back in, call that done and dusted. So first up is the flywheel. So before we start bolting this thing on, we're gonna go ahead and clean the threads out with brake cleaner just to make sure there's no gunk in there that's going to affect our torque readings. And then we need to work the flywheel on. It's a very tight tolerance, so we basically have to tighten it down in a star pattern to suck it in up to the crank and make sure it seats flat. So we're going to torque all the bolts to 20 foot-pounds to make sure it is fully seated against the crank, and then we're going to take one bolt out at a time and Loctite it. Now, I'm using blue Loctite. I try not to use red Loctite on things that aren't easily replaceable, like the crankshaft of an engine. If it's something that I could replace the whole unit, sure, but I generally stick with blue Loctite. Now, in my younger days, I used to never use Loctite because I didn't want to have to fight trying to get this thing back apart. But in my older age, I've learned that I'd much rather have to fight it a little bit to get it apart than it come apart on its own. So we use blue on most things, red when it's absolutely necessary. So now we're putting the pressure plate assembly on. Now this is kind of a different clutch. The first disc is tight in there, even with the clutch pack off the car. So we had to do a little finessing to get everything lined up. We had to actually line it up off the car and then pop it in with the alignment tool. Now, something that a lot of people overlook with alignment tools is just because the alignment tool is in all the way doesn't mean your clutch is actually aligned. You need to make sure that once it's snugged up and once it's tight, you can easily pull the alignment tool in and out. If it's tight in there and it's hard to get it in and out, it is not lined up. So always make sure that the alignment tool goes in easy, because if it doesn't, your transmission's not going to go in easy. So just save yourself the headache. All right, clutch setup is in. It was a little bit tricky. This is a really interesting setup. I've never seen one like this. The first disc has the splines. The second disc is attached to the first disc. So it's really interesting. It took us a bit to get the trick to get it all aligned right, but we did, and it's bolted up, torqued down, Loctited, bolts marked. So we need to get the transmission in. Before we can do that, we need to replace some components. So we're gonna be replacing this plastic pivot ball with a greasable steel one that we got. Jordan mentioned this one to me. So it's got a little grease fitting slot in the back, and then a little hole right there so we can keep it greased so it won't wear out so quickly. I guess that's the downside to the steel or bronze ones, is while they're stronger, they wear out way more quickly than the plastic ones. So hopefully this works. What the hell?
Take it. I'm taking it. I'm taking it. Dude, it went in so fast.
What the
It
hell?
pinched my finger. That's how fast it went in. I was not expecting it.
I did not think what the hell just happened.
Take it.
I'll take it too. I was dreading this. I was getting a headache just thinking about it. It's like, oh, here we go.
Jiggle, 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 jiggle.
Right in there. Like butter.
What? Oh.
All right, well, we just discovered that we need Raldo here when we work on these cars, because the transmission went in better than any transmission I've ever installed in my entire life. You know, we did the steps, kind of got it up, pushed it forward, got it up, pushed it forward, felt it go into the spines, which is always a guessing game. You can never tell if it's gone in, and it slid all the way to the back of the block without any resistance, like just perfect. Oh, it was amazing. So while they were tightening that, I broke out this puller that I had ordered, found someone online who had axles stuck in their hubs, and they mentioned that this puller did the trick and the press did not. This puller, I will link this thing on Amazon. I'm gonna have to get another one because I broke it because I was using an impact. But this thing got our axles out. The press could not do it, and this thing got our axles out. I am shocked, amazed, and very, very stoked. Like, I can't, this thing is a beefy unit. If you need an axle pusher, this is the one. It was like 70 bucks on Amazon, worth every penny. So now, since we already ordered all the stuff anyway, we will have spare axles and spare knuckles. New wheel bearings were a good call anyway, so really the only thing I wasted money on was buying the extra knuckles. Now at least we have spare axles still. So I'm elated. I'm so happy. So yeah, I'm gonna finish bolting this transmission up, get the transmission mount back on. All right, call it a night, pick it up tomorrow, and start working on the top end. So the next thing we got to do is all these parts right here. We've got a bunch of upgrade parts to go in. Up top here, we're basically going to be putting the entire engine bay back together. That's what we've been waiting on, is getting the last few little pieces, the odds and ends. So now we can reassemble our intercooler, our charge piping, our intakes, all of our bracing, the covers, do our oil change, refill our cooling system, basically get this all buttoned up, and then it'll be engine transmission buttoned up, and all we will have left to do is the rear end stuff. So if we can get this knocked out today, we'll be in good shape. So yeah, that being said, let me show you what we've got to go on here. I haven't taken a peek at all of these. I have taken a peek at this one because I just couldn't help myself. So we have a slew of cooling system upgrades that we got from Turner Motorsports. Turner has been awesome to deal with, and honestly, the fact that Turner exists is one of the reasons why I decided to get one of these cars to build as my seat time car, drift week car, because with all the other cars I've had, you know, when you're building a drift car and you're buying these parts, you have to bounce around. It's like, this guy makes this one bracket you need, and it uses this bushing from this guy, and then you need the OEM parts from this guy, and the performance parts from this guy and this company, and you're just bouncing around. You know, you have to order stuff from so many different places, whereas with Turner, I literally can order anything I need for this car. I can order performance parts like this. So this is their Mishimoto Collab intercooler, their charge piping, their couplers, but I can also order an oil change, wheel bearings, coolant. When you're on a time crunch like this, it's so nice to know for sure that your order is gonna get shipped quickly and it's gonna get here quickly. That being said, this is an incredibly nice piece. We've got serial number 18, by the way. I was hoping to get number 1 or 2 since I was like one of the first ones to order these, but we're already down the line, number 18. Obviously, this is going to improve performance, cooling, intake air temps, which is one of the most important things for your engine, but it's also just a little bit of pizzazz. I mean, the centerpiece of this engine is this stock intercooler, and it's ugly. I mean, there's no two ways around it. Like, it is just a very ugly unit, and when you spice that up and put a nice looking cooler like that in there, it makes a world of difference in the engine bay. The same goes for the charge pipes. So these are Turner charge pipes. They're aluminum, bead rolled, really nice units. This is an elaborate charge pipe to make because of the way the factory turbo outlet is. So these are really nice. I love the wrinkle black finish on them, and these are going to replace our stock plastic Johnnies. We also have a Mishimoto bolt-in direct fit catch can. This is pretty neat. It's got this really nice bracket, tucks in a nice place, saves me a lot of time. So this is definitely something we need to try to catch those oil particulates and not suck them all back into the engine. And then we do have a Mishimoto heat exchanger. So this is basically the radiator for the intercooler. It's in there a little bit. It's in front of the radiator, but behind the bumper. So it's a little bit more work to get to it. So I'm gonna wait on that. If we have time, we'll do it. If not, we'll do it after Drift Week. But I got it just in case we had time to do it. But these are the main things because this stuff already had to come off anyway. So yeah, a whole lot of jibber jabber. This is probably the most exciting part for me, is putting this stuff on the car. It's just gonna look so snazzy when it's all said and done. So that being said, it's not gonna install itself. So I need to quit jibber jabbering. We need to get to work. All right, so the first thing we need to do is get this one off and swap some of our parts and pieces over. Now, some of you might be confused about why this intercooler is so small if you're used to air-to-air intercoolers. So this is an air-to-water intercooler. Now what that means is we have a core here that the air is flowing through. It comes out of the turbos, into here, through this core, and then down into the intake and into the engine. Then we have water that's flowing through this core, coming up front here to a heat exchanger, which is basically just a big radiator, flowing through there, which is cooling it off, and then coming back in here and in turn cooling the core down. So unlike an air-to-air intercooler where you need to get the surface area from the intercooler itself, we're getting our surface area for cooling with the heat exchanger, and then they're able to use a much smaller core for the intercooler itself. It obviously dramatically improves packaging. Instead of having to come up front here, go through an intercooler, come back around, we can just go right over top, right into the intake. Keeps all the charge piping short, keeps everything nice and compact. It's a really neat setup, and it actually does work pretty well, but with drifting, we're working the engine very hard, but we're not going very fast through the air, we're going through the air sideways. So we need all the cooling we can get. That's one of the most important things in a drift car, is having a good cooling system. So to put the new intercooler on, we just need a couple of brackets and parts and pieces and this reservoir from our old intercooler, and we need to pull it off and out of the way anyway. Now, I used to hate these quick connect style fittings. I thought they were the silliest thing ever, but they are actually very convenient. They're really easy to work on. You pop a ring up and they just pull right off. Now, the downside is if you have to replace a hose, you have to replace it with those ends, which obviously makes it far more expensive. So I'm not a fan of that, but they are easy to work with. I'll give them that. So we start getting our brackets pulled off the old intercooler, swapped onto the new intercooler. We want to get everything set up off the car. It'll make our lives a lot easier when we go to install this back on the car. So before I put it on, I want to make sure all my wiring is where it needs to be. Everything's out of the way. I don't want to have to take it back off, even though it is fairly easy. I'm just trying to minimize spilling coolant everywhere. That's honestly my least favorite part about working on cars. The things that I dread the most are things that involve you disconnecting hoses that have fluids in them, whether it's oil, whether it's coolant. It's always messy. It's always going to get everywhere. It's always going to require some cleanup. So we get the intercooler on and in place, and now we need to swap out our intake O-rings. So this is a tip Jordan gave me. I guess when people put intakes on these cars, they kind of disturb these intake tubes, and these O-rings get really brittle, so they start to leak, and then the car throws MAF codes. And that really makes a lot of sense with this car, because when I was cleaning it out, in the trunk I found a pair of MAFs, and presumably they replaced them and kept the old ones, and the old ones were mint. So it probably never had a MAF issue. It just had an air leak, which was causing a MAF code. So that's kind of interesting. Definitely a good tip if you're ever putting intakes on an F80, change those O-rings. All the other O-rings seem fine, but those were rock hard. So with that done and out of the way, before we put the intakes back on, we need to get our charge piping back on. These go in super easy. It's a really neat design. I like how short everything is. Now, the intakes we have are knockoffs of Jordan from Arcade Tunes intakes, and they didn't take the time to pipe expand this piece. So what happens is it doesn't fit tight in the factory bellow. The factory bellow is loose in there, which means you got to really clamp it down to seal it up, and it's probably still going to leak. So I threw a bead roll on it just to try to help seal it so we don't have any intake air leaks, because if you have a leak after the MAF is when you throw MAF codes or lean conditions, it's not good. If you have a leak before the MAF, okay. After, no bueno. So we get those tossed in, and putting these intake tubes on is a little tricky. The one's a piece of cake. But the one at the front here, there's two bolts that hold it on, and it's really one of the more challenging things to do on this car for whatever reason. So with that out of the way, we're putting on the main tubes to the air filters, and in the meantime, Josue's working on swapping our stuff over to our new steering wheel. So we're keeping an OEM style wheel, but we're going to a suede version. Now, this is something I was going to do anyway, but especially because this steering wheel is one of these square ones. I forget the name of it. It's some sort of BMW Motorsports wheel or a replica of that, and it's just not my style. Even if this wasn't a drift car, it's not my thing. I'm not a fan of this wheel. It has paddles on it for no reason. It's something we needed to change, so he's working on getting that thing torn apart. It's a little tricky, but he's making headway. All right, intercooler is in, charge piping is in. Man, what a difference that made. It looks so much better. It's cleaner and simpler, but wow, I'm impressed. I'm definitely gonna have to do this to the other car because it just makes a massive difference when you pop the hood. So I've got the intakes back in. However, as I was installing this one, I was bolting it down, I noticed, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but basically this fitting has been digging into this radiator hose. I mean, it's dug in pretty deep, and that hose is not going to last much longer. So we're going to need to replace that hose, and I'd like to do it before we refill and rebleed the cooling system. So I hit up Jordan at Arcade Tunes to see if he could get me one ASAP. So we're gonna have to hold off on finalizing this for now, and we'll have to, make a little modification to this to keep that from happening again. But I'm gonna go ahead and work on getting the rest of the bracing and stuff in, just as much as I can get in while still being able to get to this after the fact and that radiator hose. Josue is working on our steering wheel. So from what I understand, these are valuable, but it's not my thing. Definitely not my thing. And for a drift car, you don't want flat sides. So I got this one, which is a suede steering wheel. Duarte actually recommended this. It was on eBay. They take stock ones and wrap them. It was really pretty inexpensive, and it seems very nice. So I like having a suede wheel in a drift car because I like to wear gloves when I'm drifting, and gloves don't work very well with leather. So I'm pretty excited about this, being able to have a suede wheel with the stripe, kind of race car-y, but while also having all the stock functionality, which we need, pretty neato. So anyway, this way I got them taken apart. We're gonna put it back together on the new wheel.
I thought carbon was supposed to be light. This is not very light.
It's probably heavier than the other one, huh?
It really is.
No. God, that is pretty. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm telling you.
What the hell?
I was like,
This one's gotta be a fake one or something.
I was just surprised. I was like,
It's way heavier. I mean, it's like,
it's at least half and not a third.
interesting. All that that's my thing with the carbon and like the people that do all the extra carbon on these cars. It's like they're putting carbon over plastic. You know, and it's like, it's not really the point of carbon. Carbon is for something to be lighter, not make it heavier by sticking it on top of something.
Layers of it.
Like carbon doesn't do anything for me if it's not for something. So after our little rant about excessive aesthetic carbon fiber, Josue got to work on putting the new steering wheel together. It was pretty shocking, the difference in weight between these two. I mean, this one literally is probably a third the weight of that other wheel. It surprised me. I thought it was going to be heavier, but not that much heavier. So Josue's getting all this stuff in. It's an intricate little process, but he did a good job of figuring out how to take it apart and put it back together. I hate doing little intricate stuff like this. I have a hard time having the patience to do it and not break stuff. So while he was working on getting that put back together so that we could reinstall that in the car, I started working on getting this catch can in. Now, I'm pretty stoked on this because I normally have to make my own catch can brackets, which is just a solid project. Even if it's a simple little bracket, it still takes a good bit of time to come up with something. And this comes with this really nice bracket, bolts right into the core support, fits it perfectly with the intakes. I mean, I was really, really pleased with this. It went in nice and easy. So the one nose goes down to the intake tube, basically where the factory breather from the valve cover will go, and then the other one goes to that. So the catch can is an intermediary. It's still able to suck the vapors down into the intake, but the catch can is what's standing in between the two, so that way you can catch the actual oil and you can drain it. We'll tighten the four-door on this lift. All right. Satisfying plastic feel. Brand new suede. Woo! Look at that. Oh, yeah, this last one. Oh, that is nice. Oh, that feels good. Oh, we're gonna get a different shift knob and stuff. We have a short shifter. I just don't know if we're gonna have time to do it. We're gonna put the hairnet back on it so we don't get it dirty while we're working on the car. Boom, done and dusted. Handbrake, steering wheel, clutch works. Well, clutch feels like it works. We still need to test that. Yeah, we should do that. Yeah. Just got to keep putting together the front. So with the steering wheel back in place, we did in fact test the clutch just to make sure it was disengaging, because if not, now's the time to find out in case we need to pull the transmission back out. But it seems like it's working, kind of hard to tell. So we went ahead and moved on to finishing up putting the engine bay back together. Now these cars from the factory have a ton of bracing. That's what makes the chassis so stiff, but it does become a bit of a nuisance when it comes to serviceability. You've got to remove all this to get to a lot of the things underneath them. Now, one downside to doing the coilovers and the angle kit is with our top hats, it relocates the top of the shock. So now our bracing can no longer bolt into the top hat. So we're losing a little bit of connection points there, but in the grand scheme of things, for what we're doing with this car, I don't think it really matters. So now we need to move on to our oil change. We flushed an extra 2 quarts down there just to make sure there's no metal shavings in the oil pan or anywhere that could get sucked up into the pickup tube. Replace the filter and then filled this thing with all 7 quarts. Now Turner also recommended this Liqui-Moly oil treatment. So I've never tried this before, but apparently it adds wear protection. So hey, I figured it's worth a shot. All right, well, what a sight for sore eyes to see this engine bay all back together. It looks so good with the Turner intercooler and the charge piping. Oh man, what a difference that made. Goes from this really ugly engine bay to pretty snazzy looking. The Mishimoto catch can's really nice too. I really like how that routed out. I'm stoked, man. It feels really good to see the engine bay finally back together. Every time I looked at this thing all apart, you just know I'm gonna have to put that together soon. Now, I am a little bummed that we couldn't put it all the way back together and just try to start the car, because I'm trying to get that hose and replace it. I don't have faith in that hose lasting a whole Drift Week trip, so Jordan ordered one. We're not sure if it's going to be here in time, so I didn't want to put everything back together and then have to take it back apart. So I left it kind of halfway there. So if it comes in, great. We'll take this intake pipe off, change the hose, and then fill the cooling system. If it doesn't look like it's going to happen, then we'll just continue on with the hose we got and bring that one with us on Drift Week in case we need it. But yeah, we're so close. Like, we have plenty of time to finish this engine bay up and be done with this part of the car. But that's how things go sometimes. You got to bounce around. So we're going to move down underneath and go ahead and get our down pipes back on, get that knocked out, and then probably move on to the rear suspension if we have time. So just trying to keep plugging away at it. I don't like building cars like this, in a rush. I hate building cars in a rush. It's like my least favorite thing to do. It's just not enjoyable. But B, bouncing around, like I like to kind of tackle one area at a time. And we haven't been able to do that. So this is weird for me, but we're getting it done. We're doing what we gotta do. So we're gonna keep doing what we gotta do. Put these down pipes on. Right, Osway?
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
All right, down pipes are back home, back in place. They still fit good with all the heat shielding we did. I'm really stoked we went ahead and did that. It was definitely worth it. I think it's gonna make a big difference. So we've got the upper O2s hooked up. We just gotta hook these up, just secure them nicely, try to keep them away from heat. These are just kind of loosely in here right now, just snugged up. And the reason for that is we wanna get the mid pipe in and tighten everything up together so we know everything's lined up. Now, the difficulty is we can't put the mid pipe in until we put the transmission heat shield in. That has to go in first, but then that blocks us getting to the drive shaft bolts, which means the rear end needs to go in before that. So we're gonna go ahead and get started on the rear end stuff. So we've got a lot to do back here, but we got our parts in. So we've got our new knuckles that we technically no longer need, but we have them, so we're gonna use them. Got our new wheel bearing and our new hub. And we got our dual caliper brackets, which these are the reason why we had to fight that axle and take everything apart, is because these need to go on before the wheel bearing goes on, or at least before the hub goes on. You could have the wheel bearing on but not the hub. So moral of the story is, I got new bearings and new hubs, might as well use them. So we're gonna finish getting these stripped down. That way we can get the dual caliper brackets on, and I'm gonna go ahead and press the hub into the bearing. This is always nerve-wracking because it is very easy to push the inner bearing race out when you're doing it. So we're gonna be careful, take our time, and then we'll have fresh bearings, dual caliper brackets. Our knuckles will be ready to go, which will save us time on the next step. So you know the deal. Enough jibber jabber. Back to work. So Josue started working on stripping apart these knuckles we got on eBay. Now, fortunately, these were pretty cheap. They were 80 bucks each shipped, which to me, really not bad. A lot of the used parts for these cars aren't that terrible, so it definitely helps offset some of the cost when you have to buy something. The new parts, on the other hand, not so cheap. This wheel bearing combo with the hub is pretty expensive, so I'm taking my time to make sure this thing goes in there square and doesn't get crooked and tear itself up, because that'd be a lot of money down the drain if I mess this up pressing it together. But fortunately, we got both of them together with no casualties. So now we need to get the dual caliper brackets onto the knuckles. Now, since the hardware that these are bolting into is basically the e-brake backing plate, these bolts never really get serviced. They don't come in and out, so the threads were pretty crusty. So we had to get in there and we worked them just a little bit, just massaged them enough to where all the bolts went in nice and clean. And then we were able to start bolting them on with more blue Loctite. Like I said, we're Loctiting pretty much everything. We're using blue. It's a good happy medium. So it's better than not Loctiting it at all. It's not as strong as red, but you know, it's that happy medium. I'm indecisive, so I kind of go in the middle. So with that, we've got the knuckles pretty well assembled. All right, rear knuckles are complete. Glad we went ahead and got that out of the way. One less thing to do when we dive into the rear suspension next time. So happy with that. Wheel bearings went together nicely, clean. Brackets went on. You can see this is where our stock caliper is going to go. This is the front of the car, and then this is going to be our secondary. We have 4-piston Willwood, so it should look pretty snazzy. I love the way dual caliper setups look when you can see through the wheel, and I think this is going to be a snazzy combo. I'm happy that we have the spare knuckles. We can assemble all this. Sweet. And now we'll have those knuckles as our spares, our backups. So yeah, I really wanted to get it running this episode, finish this up completely and be able to kind of check engine-based stuff off the box, but that hose kind of threw a wrench in my plans. So we're on schedule though. So far, so good. We're still on schedule, which is great. So that being said, we are out of time for this episode. So I'm gonna go ahead and end it here, but let me know what you guys think of the project so far. Do you think we're gonna get it done? Oh, don't even let me know that. I'm gonna end it here. I just wanna say thank you for watching, thanks for subscribing, and then I hope I'll get to see you next time. Goodbye.